Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I will read from the compilation titled Outlaw Creative, The Geometry of Life, and the piece I have selected for tonight is called The War Behind the Silence. Let's begin. There are wars that begin with drums, and then there are wars that begin with the silence after the drums. I am not talking about the kind you train for. I'm talking about the kind you survive through accident, by instinct, by unmaking pieces of yourself in order to keep what's left alive. I have known that war. I know it now. And if you're honest, you do too. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't march. It does not recruit. It just shows up. Once the noise is gone. Once the apology never came. Once the room gets quiet in that unnatural way, like someone smothered the air and left you holding the guilt. It's a silence that leaves splinters. Let me say what I mean. When I talk about the war behind the silence, I mean that slow, cruel arrangement we make, often without realizing, to keep peace in places where we are not safe. I mean the weight of unsaid things. I mean the slow, internal bruising of telling yourself, it's not that bad just to make it to lunch, to bedtime, to next week, to never. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they go quiet. Some silences are prayerful, some are respectful, but some are shaped like a scream turned inward, a scream with nowhere to go, so it makes a home in your lungs and teaches you to call it breathing. Children know this war before they have names for it. You ever seen a kid go quiet after being yelled at? Not the kind of yelling that corrects, but the kind that punishes? They don't argue back. They don't cry. They just disappear right there in the room, sitting perfectly still like a bomb that's figured out how to look like furniture. That's how early it starts. The learning, the training, not how to speak, but how to stop speaking, how to bite the inside of your cheek when the grown-ups are wrong, how to tuck your anger behind your homework, how to make your pain digestible for people who don't care enough to chew. That's the first battlefield, the first loss. And later, silence becomes a tactic, a form of survival. You learn to pick your battles, yes, but eventually you stop picking any, not because you're wise, but because you're tired. Because you start to believe that speaking won't help, that it makes things worse, that it's rude, that it costs more than it's worth. So you trade your voice for calm. You trade your truth for harmony. You trade your needs for a version of peace that leaves you out of it. And you start saying things like, it's fine, I don't want to talk about it, it doesn't matter, I'm just tired, which are all code for the same sentence, I lost that war a long time ago. But here's the thing no one tells you. The war doesn't end, it just gets quiet. It moves inside you. It starts using your voice as camouflage. It shows up in the dreams you don't remember, in the neck pain you explain away, in the flatness in your laugh when someone asks if you're okay and you say, yeah, I'm good. It takes up residence in your posture, in your avoidance, in the way you flinch at kindness because you forgot what trust feels like. This is the war behind the silence, and it's not noble, and it's not stoic, and it's not a sign of strength. It's a sign of damage. Let me tell you something hard. If silence were safety, then those of us who mastered it would be free, but we're not. We're brittle. We're over-polite. We're so careful with everyone else's comfort that we forgot what our own voice sounds like. We confuse numbness with healing. We confuse passivity with virtue. We confuse not being yelled at with being loved, and we wear that silence like a medal. But it ain't a medal. It's a muzzle. Some people think the opposite of silence is noise. They're wrong. The opposite of silence is truth. Real, messy, costly truth. And truth, spoken out loud, doesn't always sound pretty. Sometimes it sounds like rage. Sometimes it sounds like grief. Sometimes it sounds like a story that took 20 years to tell because you had to build a whole new life first just to feel safe enough to say, what happened to me was real, and it wasn't okay, and I didn't deserve it. That's not just storytelling. That's reclamation. That's retaking ground. You want to know what breaks the silence? It's not volume. It's not argument. It's not proof. It's witness. Someone saying, I hear you. I believe you. You're not crazy. That happened. Because silence makes you question your own memory. It makes you doubt the wound. And the longer you sit in it, the more you start to think, maybe you're the problem. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe you're weak. But no, you are not weak. You are not broken. You are not dramatic. You are not crazy. You are tired of carrying a war that you didn't start and didn't agree to but had to fight every damn day anyway. So here's what I want to say to you. If you've been living in that kind of silence, you don't have to win the war today. You don't have to scream. You don't have to burn it all down. But maybe, just maybe, you can whisper something true. Maybe you can say, that wasn't okay. Maybe you can tell one person. Maybe you can write it down. Maybe you can just admit it to yourself in the dark. Because even that's defiance. That's rebellion. That's how the war starts to lose ground. We don't talk about it enough, but some of the bravest people you'll ever meet are the ones who stopped being silent. The man who finally says, I was hurt. The woman who finally says, that wasn't love. The friend who finally says, I can't carry this alone anymore. They're not broken. They're not weak. They're not needy. They're warriors. Not of the loud kind, but of the enduring kind. The kind who fought without armor. The kind who bled in silence. The kind who finally said, enough. This is for them. For you. For the one who learned to survive by swallowing truth. You did what you had to do. You got through it. You're still here. But now you get to choose something else. Not easy, not clean, but real. You get to speak. Even if your voice trembles. Even if it's just one word. Even if it's just a whisper. You get to say, no more. I'm here. I remember. I matter. That is not weakness. That is not drama. That is not oversharing. That is how silence gets dismantled. That is how the war ends, or begins to